want to start with the big story that's been breaking this evening. A short while ago, US President Donald Trump addressed the United Nations General Assembly in New York, and Trump has claimed, I ended 7 wars, but I've got no help from the United Nations. Trump has also lashed out at India and China, claiming that they are the funders of Russia in the war against Ukraine with their purchases of Russian oil. Trump is claiming, I wanted to end the Gaza war, but the hostages must be released first. Trump says, so far I have only got empty words from the United Nations, and has even gone on to say, everyone says I should get the Nobel, claims that he ended 7 wars with no help from the United Nations. So Donald Trump now taking on the UN system, taking on the world, every country almost in his line of fire, even questioning Europe for the manner in which they've allowed what he says is illegal immigration, questioning climate change and much more. But let's start with what Donald Trump said once again in the context of the Indo-Pak ceasefire as well as oil purchases by India from Russia. Listen in to Donald Trump and then we'll decode his speech to the United Nations.
Likewise, in a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars. They said they were unendable. You're never going to get them solved. Some were going for 31 years, 2 of them, 31, think of it, 31 years. One was 36 years. One was 28 years. I ended 7 wars. And in all cases, they were raging with countless thousands of people being killed. This includes Cambodia and Thailand, Kosovo and Serbia, the Congo and Rwanda, a vicious, violent war that was, Pakistan and India, Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia, and Armenia and Azerbaijan. It included all of them. China and India are the primary funders of the ongoing war by continuing to purchase Russian oil. But inexcusably, even NATO countries have not cut off much Russian energy and Russian energy products, which, as you know, I found out about 2 weeks ago, and I wasn't happy. Think of it. They're funding the war against themselves. Who the hell ever heard of that one? In the event that Russia is not ready to make a deal to end the war, then the United States is fully prepared to impose a very strong round of powerful tariffs, which would stop the bloodshed, I believe, very quickly. But for those tariffs to be effective, European nations, all of you are gathered here right now, would have to join us in adopting the exact same measures. As everyone knows, I have also been deeply engaged in seeking a ceasefire in Gaza. Have to get that done. Have to get it done. Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities. But instead of giving in to Hamas's ransom demands, those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
Let's raise some big questions from that contentious, controversial speech of Donald Trump, where he's taken on the United Nations, once again targeted India in his speech. Is Donald Trump ending, or is he actually prolonging conflicts? Is Donald Trump someone whom India should now simply call out? Enough is enough. Is Donald Trump looking to bypass United Nations and all the institutions set up post-World War II? What is this Trumpian world order really about? Is Donald Trump disruptive, dangerous, or imaginative? Joining me now is Javed Ashraf, former Indian ambassador to several countries, one of India's most distinguished diplomats. I'm joined by Bill Drexel, fellow at the Hudson Institute in Washington. K.C. Singh is also joining us, former Indian diplomat, and Daniel Block, senior editor, Foreign Affairs magazine, also is with us. I'll also be joined by Craig Kafura, Director, Public Opinion, Foreign Policy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I want to come to each of you first. Let's start with you, Javed Ashraf. Your first takeaway from what you heard from Donald Trump. Do you believe that this is someone now who is determined to redraw the world order in his own image, put himself at the center of the world order?
Well, Rajdeep, first of all, I think it was a 55-minute speech which seemed more like addressed to a Republican audience, not simply to a UN General Assembly. And at many parts, he was winging his way through it. There were some extrapoor diversions in his speeches, the language that he was using. I mean, who the hell, etc., is not something which is written into his text. So it's 55 minutes of that. A lot of those themes he has already covered in his speeches in 2017, 2018, 2019. 2020 was virtual. It is, in a sense, amplification and a very stark amplification of some of the broad themes, his disdain for the UN system, multilateral order. He has, in the past, already spoken about the trading system. Today, he's completely trashed this green transition. I mean, in language that is perhaps unprecedented, about calling carbon footprint a big hoax, a climate change a big con job, etc., immigration as the greatest problem in the world. But also, in a way, he has run down the United Nations, basically saying they're of no use to us. They then called me. He, in fact, also referred to the time he wanted to renovate the UN. But a lot of that speech was, by the way, also about his predecessor, which is quite remarkable when you think of this. And as far as India is concerned, there's nothing new that he has said today. He did refer again to the two things that has been talking about, the cessation of conflict between India and Pakistan, and India and China being the primary funders of Russian war because of the oil purchases, called for stronger sanctions, wanting the EU and European countries to join in that process. We've heard that before. But I think this is really something not about reshaping the global order, but in a sense, the United States, under President Trump, vacating that global order. We seem to assume that just because it is the largest and the most powerful country in the world, whatever it does is going to be the principal determinant of the global order. There will be a lot of reordering that will take place, hedging, bandwagoning, different kinds of alliances, different kinds of equations getting formed, new accommodations, new adjustments, new countries coming up to take leadership. And it isn't just about the multilateral system of the UN. Multilateralism isn't just about the UN. It's also about the process, about a way of doing things. That is, you don't do things unilaterally, you take an initiative and work with others.
Right.
And that is the fundamental difference between India and China. China's BRI is a unilateral initiative imposed on others. Everything India has done thematically is essentially a multilateral initiative, whether it is International Solar Alliance or whether it is the CDRI and similar initiatives, One Sun, One Grid, except One World. So what I'm saying is that the world will still find a way to work together. It is the US influence in the world which will diminish, notwithstanding the bravado that you hear, because the very instruments of US engagement and influence in the world, which is trade, let me complete this, trade, investment, the soft power, technology, aid, the guarantees and commitments, the soft power, the setting up of norms and standards, the convening power to get people behind an idea, which has been the genius for the United States since the end of the Second World War. All of those instruments are being either dismantled or, in a sense, diluted, which in the long run is going to definitely diminish US power and perhaps create what we really believe has been the natural state of the world for centuries, which is a multipolar world of multiple systems working together, sometimes collaborating, sometimes in conflict. But yes, if that multipolar world is not underpinned by the discipline of some kind of multilateralism, with or without the United States, then it's going to be a fairly chaotic and turbulent world.
Let me stop you there because you've raised several important points. Daniel Block, You've just heard Javed Ashraf suggesting that what we are actually seeing is Trump bravado, that the United States, far from leading the world, is actually perhaps disrupting the world at its own cost. Do you believe that Donald Trump understands that at all? I mean, you come to the United Nations General Assembly and you berate every country in the world. This will only further, some believe, make America weaker in the long run rather than stronger. Do you agree with that?
I certainly don't think that Trump is doing the United States any favors in his rhetoric or in his policies. I mean, a 55-minute long speech going well beyond any of his remarks before to the United Nations and going well beyond his allotted time, I think is really emblematic of this in many ways, right? You have a president who's rambling and jumping from issue to issue. There's no coherent vision. There's no coherent, really, principles at work in what he's saying. It's mostly a list of personal grievances and personal hobby horses that he's going on and on about. Is it disruptive? I'd say yes. By definition, it's disruptive. It's disruptive to the literal working order of the United Nations on that day because he's speaking for way longer than he's supposed to. And it's disruptive to the series of alliances and partnerships and various institutions that the United States helped set up, including the United Nations. To what extent is Trump aware of this? It's hard to say. I think anybody who's tried to get into Trump's mind or head before has run into difficulty. And that's because I honestly don't think there's really any organizing principle or coherent theory of the world behind what Trump is doing. I don't think he has such an operative principle. I think he just kind of jumps from whatever issue he cares about. To the extent there's something he really fundamentally cares about, it's tariffs. He's long said that tariffs are something he loves. Tariffs, he says, are his favorite word in the English dictionary. So beyond that, I think it's just a sense of kind of personal aggrandizement and personal vendettas. And at the end of the day, yes, that does undermine the United States' strategic interests.
You know, Casey Singh, personal aggrandizement. Trump is only about Donald Trump. We know that now for a long time. But to come to the United Nations and claim that I am the one who's ended all these wars, including suggesting that he ended India versus Pakistan, how should India respond? Should we be now, there must come a time surely where we must say enough is enough, or do you just listen to what Donald Trump says and believe that this is background noise?
I think India has concluded that nobody in the world is taking it seriously. And when he follows it up with saying, I'm the one who deserves a Nobel Prize, you can see that it's kind of a non-serious claim that no one takes seriously at all. He's going back 30 years. What war has he settled? Even if you take India-Pakistan, government of India is saying Operation Sindoor is still on. There's nothing settled. So if anything, it's a ceasefire of sorts. He doesn't understand that. And now I think what is important is not to go into those details, 2 or 3 things. He suddenly started talking about the Brazilian president. Mm-hmm. You know, conventionally, Brazil is the first country to speak at the UNGA. And US is the second country. So as the Brazilian president was going out, Trump was coming in. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the speech, he starts talking about his meeting the Brazilian president and the chemistry being very good. Now, you know, that is what sums up Trump. It's got nothing to do with principles, detailed diplomacy. He suddenly met him, and in 15, 30 seconds, he's come to the conclusion that his chemistry is very good. And then he goes on in front of the whole world and says, that is what matters with me. You know, if I get along with somebody, so it's a highly personalized diplomacy, which he demonstrated right in front of the whole world. Mm-hmm. And secondly, when he talks of Gaza, he talks of ending the Gaza war, but he doesn't talk of the attack on Qatar. He doesn't talk of the repercussions of that attack, which is undoing US alliances in that region, which has got the Pakistanis going into an alliance with Saudi Arabia, even even saying that they would be sharing their nuclear defense with them and maybe even the weapons. None of that is of any interest to Trump. That by backing Israel and Netanyahu, who's getting progressively isolated in the world. And look at this, he was in England just a week ago. And the British Prime Minister, when asked at that point, will you recognize Palestine, just ignored the question. But 2 days later, they recognized Palestine. which is sending a signal that what Netanyahu is doing is wrong. But Trump doesn't want to talk about it. He only wants to blame Hamas. But Hamas is not Palestine. There is the West Bank, which Israel forcibly trying to occupy and segregate now from the rest. Hamas is only one part of it. Nobody who supports Palestine is saying that the Hamas should be forming the government. They're saying that Hamas should have nothing to do with it. But he doesn't want to go into all that, doesn't want to accept that he is wrongly backing Netanyahu, and he has to pull the lever on that, and without that, this current
I'm going to stop you for a moment because I think I get the gist. He's completely ignoring the details, particularly when it comes to Israel, particularly when it comes to issues where he finds himself on the back foot. He seems to believe that he alone is the center of the universe. But is there, Bill Drexel, a method in his madness? Is there something which you would say? Is there a clear method that Donald Trump has as to what is his end objective? Is there any end objective, or is it day to day? I wake up from the right side of the bed and I'm okay. I wake up from the wrong side of the bed, I rant against the world.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think we can separate out two things here. I think in this case, he was airing a lot of grievances and a lot of his general feelings, thoughts, impulses. In general, it was a bit of a rambly speech. So I'm not sure that we can take away too much in terms of a strategic communication there. I think a lot of it was just kind of off the cuff. That said, I think one of the issues here when you're dealing with President Trump is basically he doesn't communicate in the way that most U.S. presidents typically have, or really most heads of states do. One metaphor I've heard that I think is pretty on point is basically that he's like a bat. When he starts to speak, it's not so much that he's trying to communicate a policy or trying really even to communicate information. It's just as much the case that he's kind of putting out a signal, and he's going to see what bounces back in what way. And so that's why I think a lot of times, we hear there are these kind of slogans, take Trump seriously, but not literally. All these things are kind of pointing to this fact that he's not, the way that he talks, the way that he communicates is not the way that most politicians talk or communicate. He's putting out signals, and he's trying to see how people respond. And a good example of this, I think, that hasn't been mentioned is that he's continuing a trend, and I think it's more than we've seen before, of calling out European partners vis-a-vis Russia. He's started to kind of indicate this, but this was a very public dressing down of allies, European allies, for not taking a hard enough line on Russia. We'll see how. I think he's saying it mostly to see what their response is and how they're going to come back.
Interestingly, though, while he took on some of his allies, he wasn't particularly strong on China. Craig Kafura, do you believe that this is Donald Trump, who seems to find it easier to take on his allies than those who are really the one country which is probably a rival for leadership in the global race today? He wasn't as trenchant on China as he was on his own European NATO allies.
Well, the thing about U.S. allies is that when Trump beats up on them, they don't push back quite as much. But when he beats up on China, China pushes back quite hard. And China has the leverage over the U.S. in some critical areas to really hurt U.S. interests and U.S. businesses. And I think that is one of the very few coherent principles of Trump from the first term and through into the second term. Right? There are not a lot of things that Trump holds dear as sort of core principles: the tariffs, and then a real disdain for U.S. allies, and a respect for strength. And those seem to be the things that tie together a lot of very different and very incoherent policies that come out of sort of Trump administrations. But I also think it's worth noting that it's not just that this was a weird speech, this was an unusually domestically focused speech and sort of a rambling one. The Trump administration also does internal policymaking differently than other administrations have done in the past. There's less coordination between agencies. There are more decisions that seem to be taken that are not really aligned with a single strategy, whether that's with U.S.-India relations. The H-1B changes will definitely impact the U.S.-India relationship, but I really doubt that anyone thought about that before announcing those changes. we've seen that with the raids in Georgia on the Hyundai plant, right? That's going to have a huge impact on the U.S.-South Korea relationship. I really doubt anybody put that through an interagency process first. So there's a lot more chaos. There's a lot more noise. It's a lot harder to figure out what the U.S. actual position is on some of these issues, on some of these really big strategic issues, until you can get Trump in a room. And then who knows what Trump's going to say.
Javed Ashraf, I just want you to hear what Donald Trump said about the United Nations itself, because many believe that this speech was rambling. It was an attack on different countries, but also on the very basis of the United Nations and what it stands for. Just listen in, and I want you to respond to what Donald Trump said about the United Nations.
I didn't think of it at the time because I was too busy working to save millions of lives. That is the saving and stopping of these wars. But later I realized that the United Nations wasn't there for us. They weren't there. I thought of it really after the fact, not during these negotiations, which were not easy. That being the case, what is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action.
What is the purpose of the United Nations, Javed Ashraf, is what Donald Trump wants to ask. It's a question that many are asking. Unable to stop the war in Gaza, unable to stop the war between Russia and Ukraine, Donald Trump is hitting the United Nations where it hurts.
Well, I think this has been the case for a very long time. He's just put it across very bluntly. The incapacity, the inability of the United Nations to solve some of the most pressing problems of the world, of governance, security, of politics, of development, of finance, of trade. All these issues we are seeing the United Nations finds itself unable to deal with. But we should also point out that the United States is actually one of the biggest causes for the paralysis of the United Nations also. And the reason for this is that it, like other 5 members can exercise a veto. You've seen how disdainful and how contemptuous it has been of International Court of Justice, how it has very often not ratified international treaties. So there is a sense that the United Nations must serve the US purpose. Otherwise, it is of no use. And today, when you don't allow Muhammad Abbas to travel to New York, the very sanctity of the location of the United Nations in New York was that it was inviolable, that all sovereign countries would have the freedom to have their leaders travel for the UNGA or for any other meeting. But that again has been violated. I would say something even deeper. For the United States, particularly since the 2008 financial crisis, it has been turning gradually away from international institutions and multilateralism, all those institutions that it actually helped create or it was the architect of in the post-Cold War, in the post-World War II era. And it is because it no longer finds those institutions either useful or helpful to the American interest, because there have been now gradual diffusion and shift in global power, which has, in a sense, acted as a countervailing power on the US power. Now, US now is beginning to see, and particularly President Trump, multilateralism, multilateral institutions, not as framework of global governance, but as fetters on US power or the exercise of US power, which they now believe is best done bilaterally in dealing with and in recognizing or in utilizing the asymmetry of power that the United States can exercise in a bilateral context. And therefore, in so many other domains also, as you've just heard, that it has been actually hardest on some of its closest allies in Asia and Europe, people who were its partners in building those institutions, upholding those institutions. So in a sense, you are seeing, I would say, President Trump not simply as an aberration, but as an acceleration or in fact even a culmination of deeper shifts that are taking place in the US thinking about globalism, which he has also referred to, about international institutions and what use those are for the United States.
It's interesting you're saying that because Daniel Block, Donald Trump claimed this is a golden age for America. So at one level, you have receding American power, unable to end the war in Ukraine, unable to end the war in Gaza. And yet Donald Trump seems to live in this belief that he ends the wars, that United Nations remains the most powerful country in the world. Is he deluded or is he unwilling to accept this new multipolar world order where there are shifting alliances and new axes emerging even outside the United States?
I mean, I think there's still some truth to the idea that the United States is the most powerful country in the world. It still has the world's largest economy. It still probably has the world's most powerful military by a fairly comfortable margin. We're not in 1999 anymore, where the United States can really kind of do whatever it wants without any pushback. So the era of total unipolarity, as we might call it, is gone. But I don't think he's wrong to sense that the United States still stands a level above other countries in terms of its raw ability to project power. I think that his lack of credibility in terms of his initiatives, his refusal to play by or abide by various institutions that have traditionally benefited the United States is reducing American power. I think his worldview in some ways, to the extent, again, that he has a worldview, I really want to be clear that I think there's an enormous amount of incoherence in what he's saying and incoherence in his behavior. It's not even bilateralism, it's unilateralism, that because the United States still has the world's largest economy, because it still has the world's most powerful military, it should be able to do whatever it wants. It should be able to get whatever it wants in the world. That's obviously not true. That's not how it works. And so he's perennially running up against the frustrations of the fact that things are not working out the way he wants them to. That, in fact, the United States, even if it is a level above other states, does need partnerships. It does need to work with institutions and does need to work with other countries to get what it wants. And the constant tension of these two forces, the fact that he views the United States in one way, and in a way, like I said, that's partially true, but he can't get what he thinks he deserves from that is constantly causing him irritation. It's constantly causing him frustration. And we're seeing that in some ways in the list of grievances he's laying out before the UN.
Right. But we've seen Casey saying that the United States was successful, for example, in targeting Iran and sending out a firm message. On the other hand, we've seen the United States allow Netanyahu to do what he wants, it appears, in the Middle East. We've seen them relatively helpless in stopping Vladimir Putin from continuing to target Ukraine. Are we seeing in these moments, in this rambling speech, another example of declining US power, despite the fact that it's the strongest economy, the strongest military? There is a sense of a declining US power out there. And how, therefore, should India respond? I come back to it. How should India, therefore, deal with the United States?
Rajdeep, I think we need to understand the context. This is not the first time US is approaching the UN negatively. All through the 80s, they had a problem with it. As long as the Soviet Union was there, the Soviet veto would stop them, stymie them. So they used to find US, in fact, there was talk of US getting pushed out of, UN getting pushed out of New York. Then they started cutting the budget, they started exerting all kinds of pressure. But post-91, after Soviet Union collapsed, they virtually controlled the UN because there was no one there to impose them. The Chinese had not started asserting themselves. And the Soviets were gone. So the UN became their plaything. And then came 9/11. And the Americans used and shifted the agenda of the Security Council to counter terrorism. So they used the Security Council to forward their agenda on, look at the way they got the approval for the attack on Iraq. They gave all kinds of fake information there. And based on that, they got a resolution from the UN to justify an attack on Iraq, where no weapons of mass destruction were found. So that was a period where UN was being exploited by US. Now we are back to a position where a war is being fought by one of the P5 members. If one of the P5 members, Russia, is fighting a war, there's no way UN can play a role, as it couldn't play whenever US is directly involved. So that is a flaw in the UN itself. The P5, if their interests are directly involved, then the UN becomes dysfunctional because they will veto it. They'll not allow anything to happen there. Now, as far as India is concerned, I think all that.
But look at but look at Gaza. But Mr. Casey is saying, and let me bring in Mr. Drexel at this point. Look at Gaza. Clear violations of international law are going on a daily basis, Mr. Drexel, and Donald Trump's thrown his hands up. He says, give me the hostages back, and then we will talk peace. Now, the world is recognizing Palestine. US chooses not to do so. Should we see that there is no morality left in this world order? This is an amoral world order.
Well, look, I think the Palestine issue has a very long history in the UN that's quite unique, and the U.S.-Israel relationship also has a very unique relationship. It's hard to use that particularly as a bellwether for the strength of the UN. I think this recognition of a Palestinian state, it's hard to know even what it means or what it's going to do. You know, it's largely symbolic. It airs some feelings, but it doesn't actually change any facts on the ground. But I do think at the end of the day, the UN has been fading towards irrelevance. It's an ailing system. I say this as a person who formerly worked at the UN, and it's deeply flawed, including by the fact that India is not on the Security Council. So I think that there's been welling up a lot of discontent with the UN, not just in the United States, but certainly, especially on the right in the United States, and that's what's being manifest here.
Okay. I think we've got a sense from all these fine voices as to why Donald Trump, in a sense, has upended this world order and thereby created a situation of constant disruption, which is why he's probably at the moment the figure who we track virtually every night at the top of the news. But to all my guests, I appreciate you joining me for your valuable analysis of what Donald Trump said or didn't say in that speech. Let me turn from there to the big story back home. And the big story back home today is coming from Kolkata, where unprecedented overnight rainfall meant that ahead of Durga Puja, the city was totally waterlogged. And even more tragically, 9 people were electrocuted. While the blame game is on between the Mamata government and the BJP, the fact of the matter is the people of Kolkata have suffered just ahead of the festive season. Take a look at tonight's ground report from a completely waterlogged Kolkata.
Days ahead of Pujo festivities, Kolkata witnessed incessant rainfall. By Tuesday evening, 9 deaths were reported, mostly due to electrocutions. The downpour exposed the city's crumbling infrastructure like never before. Roads flooded. Metro services hit. Durga pandals in water. And vehicles completely drowned. Waterlogging at the Kolkata airport led to flight cancellations and delays, leaving passengers stranded. A similar sight was witnessed at Sialda railway station, where trains were seen submerged in water.
Eastern Railway have already declared that there are several long-distance trains which have been rescheduled due to this waterlogging in different parts of the Howrah division. And similar incident we have seen in Southeastern division in Sialda station as well. The railway authorities are tirelessly working to pump out the water from the tracks.
The massive waterlogging brought traffic public transport and daily life to a grinding halt across the city of Joy.
क्या हालत है? हालत सही है, लेकिन हम डूब गए, ऑफिस डूबना नहीं चाहिए इस लोगों ने। क्यों? इतना पानी में कौन जाते हैं ऑफिस? हम डूब गए, रिलीफ लेके आ जाओ।
Most parts of the city of Joy, Kolkata, are currently waterlogged due to the heavy rainfall that lasted at least 6 hours overnight. And right now we are present in front of Netaji Nagar post office, which is in the South Kolkata area. And this street is also waterlogged. Most of the shops are closed, and auto services, bus services, everything have been suspended due to the waterlogging situation. And a person was died after being electrocuted in this particular area.
Rainwater entered homes and government offices. The roads approaching the secretariat were flooded.
क्या करोगे? ये पानी कैसे निकलेगा? क्या लग रहा है?
अब निकालना पड़ेगा कुछ भी करके। अभी तो बहुत हालत खराब थी। रात भर रात से हो रही है, बहुत 12 बजे से।
Officials and staff struggled to drain the rainwater.
The Calcutta has a capacity to remove 20 mm water in an hour. Right. And the water, within few hours, the contempt of rain was 300 to 350 mm. So you can see that how much time it should take.
Overwhelm the drainage system.
Overwhelm the drainage system, the capacity of pipe.
Schools shut till September 25th. Multiple flood-related deaths were reported in different parts of the city. Unprecedented rains exposing the inadequate infrastructure and civic mess in the city. To make matters worse, the IMD has predicted more rains in the coming days, clouding the Durga Puja fervour. With Tapas Sengupta, Rajesh Saha and Indrajit Kundu. Bureau Report, India Today.
Okay, let's go straight across to our Kolkata Bureau Chief, Indrajit Kundu, joins me. Appreciate your joining us, Indrajit. The worrying factor is the 9 people who have died because of electrocution. It clearly shows negligence either on part of the Kolkata electricity supply or the power ministry of the West Bengal government. It's one thing to have waterlogged streets because of unprecedented rainfall, but the electrocution, 9 deaths, who's going to take accountability for it? Or who is being held accountable?
Well, that is indeed the big question. I did ask this question to the Kolkata mayor. In fact, Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee herself spoke about this issue when she held a press conference earlier in the evening, and she has squarely blamed the Calcutta Electric Supply Corporation, a private entity which runs the electric supply in the city. Now, there has always been question on the CESC every time there is such a deluge, be it during Amphan or now during this entire deluge all through Kolkata. 9 people losing their lives. The blame game has begun. Opposition political parties, of course, blaming the Mamata Banerjee administration. The government, of course, pinning the blame on the private agency. Mamata Banerjee said that the CESC, the private entity, should give compensation to the families of those who have died. The big question, of course, is will the government now initiate action against the CESC? Will they be made to pay for the blunder that they have done? Because it is public hazard. Remember, within a week's time, few lakhs and lakhs of devotees will be out on the streets of Kolkata. And there is prediction of further rain. So if such thing happens once again, imagine the kind of catastrophe that Kolkata may witness. So heads must roll and accountability must be fixed. The question, of course, is will the Mamata Banerjee government do that right now?
Well, the big question is enough of passing the buck. The Mamata Banerjee government really, the buck stops with it. It cannot put the blame now on the private CESC. It needs to get CESC to get its act together or hold itself responsible. 9 people electrocuted is simply unacceptable. So what made Zubeen Garg so special? I'm joined by 2 voices of Assam in a way. Kaushik Deka is managing editor, India Today magazine, also edits India Today Northeast. Sanjoy Hazarika, veteran author, filmmaker and journalist. Appreciate both of you joining us. Kaushik Deka, you wrote a very moving piece on Zubeen Garg. Tell us what made him, very succinctly for our viewers, so special.
Rajdeep, it's pretty difficult to pin it down, and for me, it's very difficult that I'm talking about Jubin, who is no more with us. It's very difficult to even believe that he's no more with us. But what I found about Jubin, the specialty is that he was a superstar, but yet he was so accessible. He was everyone's Jubin. Every individual in Assam, whether he is a top class bureaucrat or a business person or a farmer or even a daily wage earner laborer, they felt he was there. Jubin could be found everywhere on the street, in assembly, in big events. There was no appointment. There was nothing that you required to meet Jubin. So we have seen many superstars, but we haven't seen one like him. He was a person who was so kind to everyone. He donated with all his heart. He was always there in Assam's crisis. And I would disagree if someone says he was political. He was never political. He was all about Assamese identity. He would only raise his voice when he felt that there was something bad happening to Assam. It didn't matter to
Right.
him whether it was political or not political, whether it was social, economic, or anything. He was truly a man of the masses, and that's why we saw what happened today on the street.
Okay.
Not just today, for
You're,
last 3 days, Assam was shut
you're,
down.
you're saying he was. You're saying he was in a way someone accessible and in a way a man of the masses. Sanjoy Hazarika, you will recall that the last time perhaps Assam saw such crowds coming in for a funeral was for Bhupen Hazarika. Bhupen Hazarika was the iconic figure of Assam. Zubeen Garg, very different, for a different generation in a way. What, according to you, made him so special?
I think about Zubin, he tapped into a certain angst. He was able to listen to the pain of young people, and he understood that very well. He was able to tap into that and reach people's hearts. I mean, I am not in Guwahati today, but it feels as if there's been a death in every family. That's the feeling, and I think it's important that
Was that through his music? Was that through his
in
music
this-
or the messaging? Was it, Sanjoy, was it the music that touched the chord with people? Or was it more than just the music?
His life, his music, his message was one. Everything was seamless. And I think it's important to remember that he burst onto the stage with an air of vulnerability, exuberance, and energy at a time that Assam was going through a crisis, of violence and so on, about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And he captured the uncertainty of a generation and gave it voice. And that was extraordinary, but because the man was a genius.
But
I mean,
in
that's
a
just.
way, I take your point. In a way, though, Kaushik, his appeal cut across generations. I mean, as someone on the outside, I was just staggered to see the outpouring across generations. So not just a youth icon, but someone who seemed to represent Assam's identity in the 21st century.
Yes, he did. He showcased that he could represent Assam at the national level. And one important part was that he was transparent. As Mr. Hajarika has pointed out, people knew what he meant for, what he stood for. There was his message, his songs, his music, or his movies. Everything represented the same Jubin. There was no two sides to him. So that transparency also helped, and he he was vulnerable. At the same time, he was stubborn. He would stand up to anything that he didn't like. For instance, when Ulfa issued a dictate that nobody can sing Hindi songs during Bihu festival, he said, I would. And he flouted that dictate. And Ulfa even couldn't do anything. No other singer could dare to do that. So he always spoke out whenever he wanted to. He was always there when there was flood in Assam. So apart from his music, the way he lived his life, we always talk about living life like king size. He actually did that. And in that way, he showcased that, as I wrote in my piece, that he was actually perhaps the God's own child. He did whatever he wanted, and he was not apologetic about it. He would not come back and say that, okay, I did a mistake. He did whatever he wanted to do, and he was transparent about
Kaushik?
it. That was the most important part.
Kaushik, I'm going to stop you there. Sanjoy, Kaushik, obviously, as I said, it's very rare to see a singer who in today's world is able to capture the hearts of millions and also give them a sense of identity well beyond just his music. That's exactly what Zubeen did. Sanjoy Hazarika and Kaushik Deka for joining me on this rather sad day when Zubeen was no longer with us. I appreciate both of you joining me, our thoughts and prayers with his family. Thank you all for joining us. Mohanlal, of course, the star of the show in some way. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Good night, Shubh Ratri. Jai Hind. Namaskar.